No one truly knew where Aidin des Damnés was. Not anymore. Lucien had made sure of it. At first, maps had been drawn in secret. Captains sketched shorelines by moonlight, marked reefs, coves, and trade routes. But one by one, those maps vanished, stolen, burned, or found in the mouths of the dead. Cartographers went missing. Ships that tried to leave without Lucien's blessing never made it home. Soon, a myth replaced direction. Aidin became a ghost on the sea, a place you didn't find. It found you. Lucien had hired a Moroccan mathematician to recalculate star paths and altered compass readings with magnets buried in the cliffs. At the island's heart, he built a massive iron obelisk disguised as a lighthouse. Its shifting light scrambled navigation. Sailors called it the Devil's Lantern. Only those given passage coins by Lucien's court could return. Everyone else was lost to the ocean or madness. Even the British Navy once tried to chart the island. Their scouts vanished. Their admiral returned pale, mute, and bleeding from the ears. Because Eden didn't want to be found. It wanted to be forgotten until it chose to be remembered, and by then, it was already too late. By the end of all tales, one truth remained. You didn't leave Aidin des Damnés, not unless it allowed you to. Many tried, pirates with treasure maps, nobles with false names, lovers with hopes. They plotted, rowed, begged, even bribed, but the sea always pushed them back or swallowed them whole. Ships broke apart on calm waters, compass needles spun wild, winds died suddenly or screamed like banshees. Lucien never stopped them. He didn't need to, because the island chose who stayed. Those it kept were changed, haunted, hardened, reborn. Some found purpose, others found madness, most simply lost themselves in the shadows. The House of Masks grew silent. The whispers in the jungle deepened. Even Scarlet was seen less often, her red dress trailing through the mist like memory. Lucien, older now, stood less, but his presence hung heavier than ever. He had built a kingdom not of walls, but of wants, not of gold, but of secrets. And the island? It thrived, not on crops or trade, but on what people gave up to stay. Names, guilt, oaths, love. One last truth remains carved into a rock at the harbor. Here, paradise is not found, it is survived. And so the island remains, waiting for the next soul to arrive. She arrived with the tide, alone, barefoot, wearing only a red silk dress soaked in seawater. No one knew her name, no one saw the ship that brought her, and yet by morning, the island was whispering of her like a storm already breaking. They called her Scarlet. She spoke little, laughed even less, but when she entered the tavern, all voices stopped. Her eyes were cold fire, and every man who tried to charm her ended up cursed, broken, vanished, or mad. One sailor claimed she kissed him, and he dreamed of drowning for a week. Another swore she walked on the sea, barefoot, as if it were stone. Mama Sola took her in. Lucien never spoke of her, but he watched her closely. Soon, the red dress became legend. It never tore, never stained, it shimmered even in shadow. Some believed it wasn't silk at all, but woven from the blood of her enemies. Others said she had once been royalty, betrayed and buried alive, only to rise again. But the truth, no one dared ask, because on an island built by sin and secrets, even the boldest pirates feared the girl in the red dress. And deep down, she knew it. By day, Aidin des Damnés belonged to drifters, but by night, a new order ruled. The Corsairs' Court, a council of pirates, smugglers and exiled nobles who met beneath a canopy of stars and smoke. They gathered in a half-ruined amphitheater built from coral stone, where waves crashed behind them like distant applause. Seats were carved with names of lost ships, La Vierge Brisée, the Broken Swan, El Infierno Azul. Every leader had bled for their place here, and none sat without scars. Lucien presided from a throne of salvaged cannons, his face unreadable in the firelight. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply listened, and when he spoke, even the sea hushed. The court resolved disputes, planned raids, and managed the island's trade in luxuries and lies. It was here that alliances were sealed with rum and blood, traitors were named, and the laws of Aidin, few, brutal, and sacred, were decided. There was no mercy in the Corsairs' Court. Only survival. If you lied, they knew. If you begged, you sank. If you challenged Lucien, you vanished. And yet, every rogue who mattered clawed to be here. Because on this island, power wasn't inherited, it was earned. then defended with a blade. At the heart of Aden des Damnés stood a sprawling tavern built from dark mahogany, coral stone, and the wreckage of sunken ships. Its name was simple, Sin, etched in iron above the entrance, and known in every pirate port from Port Royal to Tortuga. Inside, time dissolved into music, sweat, and smoke. The air was thick with clove tobacco and the musk of bodies pressed too close. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows over painted walls depicting naked angels locked in embrace with demons. A string quartet, all exiled musicians from Vienna, played in a raised loft, their instruments out of tune but their rhythm infectious. At Sin, no currency was refused. Spanish doubloons, English pounds, a woman's necklace, a man's dignity. Rum was poured from barrels stolen off Dutch ships. Meals were rich, salted pork, pineapple stew, and candied nuts from the colonies. But it was the flesh trade that brought most to Sin. The brothel rooms upstairs were named after the 7 deadly sins, each with its own set of rules and its own price. Behind the bar, an old Creole woman named Mama Sola ran the show with iron eyes. "Pleasure is the law here," she'd growl. "And breaking it? That's the only sin we punish." It was small, no bigger than a silver doubloon, but it ruled the fate of every soul who stepped foot on the island. The coin of passage, stamped with Lucien's sigil, a serpent coiled around a crown. It shimmered oddly, as if forged from metal not found in any kingdom. Some swore it was cursed, others claimed it was blessed. But one thing was certain, without the coin, no ship dared land at Aden des Damnés, and none were allowed to leave. The coin was both invitation and leash. Given only by the Corsair's court or Lucien himself, it granted access to safe harbors, food, protection, and a place at the table, no matter your past. Pirates carried it with pride. Exiled nobles wept upon receiving it. Spies hid theirs in hollowed teeth. Lose it, and you were nothing. Steal one, and the punishment was worse than death. They didn't hang you. They took you to the reef of bones and left you chained to drown with the tide, your screams muffled by gulls. Some said the coins could whisper, that they grew warmer when danger was near, that Lucien could feel every one of them, no matter where it sailed. Because the island didn't just own your body, it owned your way back. It always came at night. No lanterns, no sails, no flag. Just a ghostly silhouette gliding through the fog, hull black as ink, anchored just beyond the reef where even the bravest captains refused to sail. They called it the ship with no flag, and no one ever saw it arrive or leave. Lucien never acknowledged it. The Corsair's court never spoke of it. But when the ship appeared, the entire island shifted. Taverns emptied, music stopped, even Mama Sola closed her doors. A small rowboat would glide from the shore, carrying a masked envoy, always silent, always cloaked. They delivered sealed crates or took them away. No one knew what was traded. Some believed it was gold, others said souls. A few whispered it carried prisoners too dangerous for even Eden. Once, a young thief tried to follow the boat. His body washed ashore days later, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a scream. No wounds, no blood, just terror. Scarlett once stood on the cliffside, watching the ship vanish into the sea mist. She didn't blink. She only whispered, "It's not from here." Because some things on Aden des Damnés weren't built by men, and that ship, it answered to something older. Their names were whispered like a prayer and a curse, Thomas and Myriel. A sailor and a noble's daughter. He arrived with a stolen coin, she with a ruined name. They met under the lanterns of Sin, where laughter hid broken pasts. They were opposites, grit and grace, but the island didn't care. It drew them together like the tide. They wanted freedom, not gold, not power, just a place beyond Eden's grip. So they planned their escape. A small boat, one clear night, no goodbyes, just the stars above and the open sea ahead. They made it as far as the reef. But the island does not forgive betrayal. At dawn, the boat drifted back, empty. Weeks later, Myriel's locket washed ashore, filled not with her portrait but seawater. Thomas's dagger was found buried in the sand at the base of the Garden of Forgotten Vows. Lucien said nothing. Mama Sola wept, and Scarlett lit a candle in the House of Masks. Now, lovers leave coins at the reef, begging the sea for mercy, but none dare sail, because Aden des Damnés may offer passion and pleasure, but it never lets you go without a price. And love, here, is the most dangerous sin of all. Just offshore from Aden de Damnay lies a jagged crescent of coral and shattered stone, known as the Reef of Bones. It gleams white under the moon, not from salt, but from the bleached remains of those who crossed the island's laws. No one approaches it willingly. The reef isn't marked on any map. Its shallow waters are littered with the wreckage of ships that tried to escape without permission, and the skulls of men chained to their hulls. Seabirds circle constantly. The waves there are always redder than they should be. This is where justice is served when the Corsair's court demands silence. Traitors, thieves, and coin forgers are rowed out at low tide and shackled to rusted moorings. Some are gagged, others left to scream. As the tide rises, it's said the water carries their final confessions back to shore. Lucienne never attends these executions, but Mama Sola does. She brings a flask and a prayer, and watches every death with silent, glassy eyes. The sea remembers, she always says, and the bones remind us. Because on this island, prisons weren't needed, only the tide, and the knowledge that if you betrayed Aden, you'd never be buried anywhere but beneath the waves. His name was Lucien Devereux, a disgraced French aristocrat with a mind sharpened by exile and a heart long since blackened by revenge. Banished from Versailles after a scandal too vile for even the French court, Lucien vanished into the Caribbean with a stolen fortune and an appetite for power. He arrived on the uninhabited island in 1719 with a crew of mercenaries, slaves, and courtesans. Within a year, the jungle had been cleared, paths carved, and structures raised. But these were no ordinary buildings. The taverns bore the scent of rose oil and sin. The brothels were decorated with velvet and mirrors. There were no jails, only hidden pits. And there was no law, only Lucien's whispered word. He named it Aden de Damnay, Eden of the Damned. Lucien wasn't interested in trade or treaties. He wanted to build a haven where Europe's unwanted could drown in indulgence. He recruited runaway slaves, pirates, disgraced clergy, bankrupt nobles, even actors fleeing scandal. They brought their secrets and their skills. Within 5 years, Eden was no myth. It was a destination, a disease of decadence spreading quietly across the Atlantic. And at its center stood Lucienne, with a goblet of blood-red wine and the smile of a god. There was only one grave on Aden de Damnay. It lay at the highest point of the island, beyond the jungle paths, where the sea winds howled like mourning spirits. No markers, no name, just a single stone slab, weather-worn and covered in moss, encircled by black orchids that never grew anywhere else. Most guests never knew it existed. Those who did, avoided it. Mama Sola visited it once a year, dressed all in white, carrying a bowl of rum, honey, and ash. She never spoke during the ritual. She just knelt, poured the offering, and whispered into the earth. When asked who lay beneath, she'd only say, "The first blood, the last oath." Some said it was Lucien's lost child. Others believed it was his first love, buried alive as punishment. A few whispered it was Lucien himself, and the man who ruled the island was merely a shadow. One drunk corsair tried to dig it up once. The next morning, his ship was found drifting, the crew missing, the sails torn to ribbons. The grave was untouched. Because some things on the island were sacred, and Eden's only grave wasn't just a resting place. It was a warning, carved in silence. There was only one grave on Aden de Damnay. It lay at the highest point of the island, beyond the jungle paths, where the sea winds howled like mourning spirits. No markers, no name. Just a single stone slab, weather-worn and covered in moss, encircled by black orchids that never grew anywhere else. Most guests never knew it existed. Those who did, avoided it. Mama Sola visited it once a year, dressed all in white, carrying a bowl of rum, honey, and ash. She never spoke during the ritual. She just knelt, poured the offering, and whispered into the earth. When asked who lay beneath, she'd only say, "The first blood, the last oath." Some said it was Lucien's lost child. Others believed it was his first love, buried alive as punishment. A few whispered it was Lucien himself, and the man who ruled the island was merely a shadow. One drunk corsair tried to dig it up once. The next morning, his ship was found drifting, the crew missing, the sails torn to ribbons. The grave was untouched. Because some things on the island were sacred, and Eden's only grave wasn't just a resting place. It was a warning, carved in silence. Hidden beyond the palms and torchlit paths was the island's most mysterious structure, the House of Masks. Unlike the noisy tavern, it was silent, shrouded in vines and secrecy. Only those invited could enter, and even they were stripped of their names at the door. Each guest donned a mask, gold, ivory, feathered, or grotesque. Once inside, rank disappeared. A prince could kneel to a beggar, a priest could confess sins he never dared speak. No one knew who was who, and that was the point. The house pulsed with music, both foreign and ancient. Dancers twirled in slow circles beneath flickering lanterns. The air smelled of sandalwood, sweat, and orchid. Courtyards echoed with laughter, but also with whispers that could change empires. Lucien himself hosted these gatherings. He wore a black mask with no mouth and spoke only through gestures. Power flowed through these halls. Politicians, pirates, spies, lovers, all tangled in ritual and illusion. Alliances were forged, secrets traded. Some guests never left. They said the House of Masks was not for pleasure, but transformation. What you shed there, you never got back. And once you left, the real mask was the one you wore outside. Because on this island, identity was currency, and illusion, the most powerful weapon of all. Among the many strange souls drawn to Aiden de Damnés, none were more feared or needed than Dr. Alaric Venn. A former surgeon from Edinburgh, Venn had once treated dukes and generals, but rumors of dark experiments, vanished patients, and anatomy lessons that involved the freshly dead sent him fleeing the mainland with blood still under his nails. Lucien found him long before the authorities did. On Eden, Venn built his clinic, though most called it the Butcher's Garden. Hidden behind silk curtains and thick herbs, it smelled of antiseptic and rot. Skulls lined the shelves beside surgical tools, some labeled, some not. He treated bullet wounds, broken bones, and tropical fevers, but he also performed strange operations, altering voices, appearances, even memories. Some patients came out healed, others came out different. Venn never spoke unless necessary. His left hand was gloved at all times. Some said it was burned, others said it wasn't human at all. Despite the fear, people lined up outside his door, because pain was common on Aiden, and Venn, monster or not, was the only one who could pull a blade from your gut and stitch your sins back inside you. He didn't ask questions, but he always remembered your blood. Nestled at the island's edge was a place no map marked, the Garden of Forgotten Vows, overgrown with wild orchids, tangled vines, and marble statues faded by sun and time. It was eerily quiet, as if the wind itself held its breath. They said it was once a chapel, built by monks fleeing the Inquisition, but now it was a graveyard of promises, of marriages broken, loyalties shattered, and oaths deliberately left to rot beneath the petals. Couples came here to part without guilt. Pirates brought old flags to burn. Priests laid down their crosses. Even spies buried names beneath the soil. It was a place to unbecome. In the center stood a cracked stone altar, always covered with new offerings, rings, locks of hair, confession letters, even bloodied uniforms. No one guarded it, yet no one dared steal from it. The garden demanded silence and surrender. Nothing taken, only left behind. Lucien called it his cathedral. Here, redemption wasn't offered, it was refused. Because on this island, the past was a chain, and the garden was the only place where people could cut it loose, though never without bleeding. The vines grew thicker each month, and the altar, it never stayed empty for long. She appeared one dawn at the edge of the reef, barefoot, silent, no older than 10. Her dress was torn, her hands clutched a locket, and behind her, the rising sun cast no shadow. They called her Anouk. No ship claimed her, no records showed a missing child. She never spoke, never cried, but she watched. Everything, from the tavern steps, the jungle paths, the corsair's court, eyes like polished obsidian, always calm, always too knowing. Mama Sola took her in, whispering prayers the rest of the island had forgotten, but even she looked afraid. Strange things followed Anouk, fires that wouldn't catch, wine that turned bitter, maps that tore themselves in the wind. Once, a sailor struck her in a drunken rage. The next morning, he was found tangled in the roots of a ceiba tree, throat blackened, body untouched. Lucien never approached her, not once, but he ordered a guard placed outside her quarters, not to protect her, to protect the island. Some believed Anouk was the daughter of the island itself. Others, a curse returned. A few said she was what waited for anyone who looked too deep into Eden's soul. Because in a place built on shadows, she was the one thing that had none. It came without warning. A wall of black clouds rose from the horizon like a vengeful god. Winds howled, waves crashed high as palm trees, lightning forked the sky in violent streaks. Even the birds fled. Islanders stared upward, silent, because this wasn't just weather, it was punishment. Boats were torn from docks, roofs ripped into the sea, fires extinguished with salt and fury. The jungle itself twisted in pain. For 3 days and nights, the island fought the storm and lost, or so it seemed. But through it all, Lucien never flinched. He stood at the Devil's Lantern, cloaked and still, watching the chaos like a general observing a battle. Mama Sola burned herbs and wailed songs older than the island. The House of Masks sealed its doors. Scarlet vanished. When the storm finally passed, Eden was battered, but not broken. No lives lost, no graves dug. And in the center of the island, the Garden of Forgotten Vows bloomed with new black orchids. Dozens of them. Some say Lucien made a deal with something deep beneath the waves. Others swear the storm was a test. But everyone agreed on one thing. Eden de Damnée cannot be drowned. Because it was never fully alive to begin with. It was whispered across Europe, a sun-soaked island where rules vanished with the tides. Sailors called it the Pleasure Isle, a hidden jewel in the Caribbean where hedonism reigned, and virtue was the only exile. The year was 1724. A British merchant ship docked quietly at dawn, its crew already drunk with anticipation. Women in sheer linens danced on the beach, rum flowed like rivers, and laughter echoed from bamboo taverns. There were no churches here, no kings, no clocks. Time was measured only by how many bodies lay tangled in hammocks by morning. This wasn't just some pirate's paradise, it was a private island owned by an exiled nobleman from France. A man who built his own kingdom of excess, where gold bought silence and bodies were currency. Ship captains paid in silver to anchor here. Smugglers traded slaves, spices, and stolen silks. Nobles came in disguise to indulge the forbidden. Here, loyalty meant nothing. Lust ruled the sand, and behind every smile was a secret. But every paradise has its cost. And the sins of this island were about to awaken something far more dangerous than desire. The ship's anchor hit the seabed. The gates to the island of pleasure had opened. Beyond the main settlement, past the torchlit paths and drunken songs, lay a forest locals called the Whispering Grove. Towering ceiba and banyan trees wove a canopy so thick, even daylight hesitated to enter. Few dared step inside after sunset. They said the trees whispered secrets, real ones. Betrayals, murders, hidden gold, names of spies, and those who listened too long never came back the same. The grove was sacred to the island's oldest inhabitants, runaway slaves, freed captives, and native guides who had once lived here before Lucien arrived. They claimed the land was alive, that the roots listened, that every secret spilled in the dark fed something ancient beneath the soil. Some said Lucien visited the grove alone each month, barefoot and silent, vanishing for hours. When he returned, his orders were always sharp, his knowledge too precise, as if the trees themselves had spoken to him. Rumors grew that the grove could curse, that it chose who lived and who vanished, that the jungle served as Lucien's second court, wilder, older, and unforgiving. Visitors left offerings at its edge, coins, blood, even teeth, hoping to appease whatever watched from the shadows. Because on this island, even the trees were listening. Once every year, when the moon rose swollen and low above the sea, Eden de Damnée transformed for a single, unforgettable night, the Feast of Tides. No fights, no business, no blood, just indulgence, absolute and enforced. From the jungle paths to the rocky cliffs, the island glowed with lanterns made of whalebone and dyed silk. Tables stretched along the shore, weighed down with roasted boar, tropical fruits soaked in rum, honeyed fish, and pastries dusted with crushed pearls. Musicians played instruments from 5 continents. Dancers swirled barefoot in the sand. Everyone wore white. Even pirates cleaned their boots. Even spies laughed. At midnight, Lucien emerged, barefoot, bare-chested, crowned with fronds and gold. For the only time each year, he made a toast to what. He arrived with ink-stained hands, a weathered compass, and too many questions. Henrik Voss, a famed Dutch cartographer, had mapped half the known world. But Eden de Damnée was his obsession. He claimed he could chart it without permission, said no island could hide forever. Lucien gave him a guest coin, let him draw, let him wander. For weeks, Henrik worked from sunrise to moonlight, measuring tides, sketching cliffs, counting steps between palm trees. He claimed the island's shape shifted ever so slightly each night. He spoke of paths that disappeared, stars that didn't align. He said the trees moved. Then one morning, his maps were found stacked neatly on the steps of Sin, all blank. His compass spun wildly, and Henrik Voss was gone. No struggle, no signs, just silence. Some say the island consumed him. Others believe he found a truth too heavy to carry. A few insist he still walks the jungle, eyes hollow, mouth stitched shut. But Mama Sola said it best. Aiden doesn't fear being known, it fears being understood. Because this was no ordinary island, and some truths were never meant to be mapped. Beneath the Corsair's court, hidden behind a locked cellar door and 3 feet of stone, lay the Chamber of Ink, a room lit only by red candles, where Eden's most dangerous deals were written not in ink, but in blood. Here, the island's blood contracts were sealed. Pirates swore loyalty. Exiled nobles sold their lands. Spies pledged silence. And all of it was recorded by the scribe, a mute monk in crimson robes who never aged, never left, and never blinked. His quill was carved from a human rib. His parchment, oddly textured, was rumored to be stretched skin. Each contract required a drop of blood on the page. No signatures, just flesh. Once signed, the terms were absolute. Break it, and the island responded. One man tried, a wealthy Dutch trader who promised safe passage for Lucian's goods, then betrayed him to the Spanish. His ship exploded in open waters, no cannon fire, no survivors. The only thing that remained? The blood contract, floating in the waves, perfectly dry. Mama Sola once said, "The sea don't hunt traitors, the island does." Because here, paper wasn't just law, it was curse. And every promise made in blood bled back eventually.